My name is Frank Halden, and I am 65 years old. I was once a fire captain, a man people turned to when the world was burning literally. I carried children out of buildings, gave CPR to strangers in smoke-filled stairwells, and once pulled a man out from under a collapsed beam seconds before the roof caved in. But none of that mattered when it came to my own family. Not in the way you'd think. My daughter, my only child, once clung to me like I was her whole world. Then the fire took her mother, and suddenly I became the man who couldn't save the one that mattered most. After that, something shifted. A distance grew. Not just emotional, but deliberate. Cold. She stopped calling me Dad. She started saying Frank like I was a stranger who had delivered mail once but stayed too long. I didn't try to fight it. I thought time would soften things. I thought love would survive the silence. I was wrong. I didn't hear from her for years. No calls, no holidays. Just an address that changed every couple of years and an occasional photo I wasn't supposed to see. Then 2 months ago, an envelope arrived. No return name, just the initials, MS, on the flap. Inside, an invitation. Her wedding. The date. The time. The place. My name printed in lowercase. No father of the bride. No note. No warmth. Just logistics. I stared at that card like it was a death notice. Not because she was getting married, but because I realized I was already gone in her story. But I went. Not to reclaim something. Not to fix what couldn't be fixed. I went for one reason, only to be seen. And I had no idea the person who would finally see me wasn't her at all. Frank Halden, 65, retired captain of Rescue Squad 37 Chicago Fire Department. I wasn't the kind of man who put plaques on the wall or talked about the past over beer. I just did the job. 37 years in the department, 3 commendations, 1 Medal of Valor, 12 lives saved that I could count, and God knows how many more I never knew about. But the last one broke me. The day my wife died in the Kensington warehouse fire, I was there. I was inside. I had a team clearing the south exit, and I went north alone because the call said someone was trapped on the mezzanine. I thought it was a child. I didn't know it was her. By the time I reached her, she was already unconscious, smoke thick as oil. I dragged her toward the stairwell. The ceiling groaned, and something in me knew we weren't going to make it. But I tried. I got her halfway down before the collapse came. A beam crushed my leg. I was lucky they found us at all. She didn't make it. I did. And that was the beginning of the end. My daughter Melissa was 16. Too old to be protected from grief, too young to understand the difference between failure and fate. I tried to explain. She didn't want to hear it. The silence started slowly, missed dinners, blank stares, short replies. Then she moved out at 18. Took her mother's maiden name, told people I was out of the picture. And I didn't fight it. Not because I didn't care, but because grief is a strange war. You don't win by forcing your way back in. You win by waiting if there's even anything left to wait for. I lived in a small 2-bedroom house near Lake Geneva. Quiet, clean. My mornings were coffee, and the newspaper. My nights were TV shows I never finished. I kept my turnout gear folded in a cedar chest. I never remarried. I didn't know how to talk to people who hadn't run into burning buildings for a living. I volunteered sometimes at the station at the community center, but I stayed away from crowds. Not because I feared them, but because I knew my story wasn't one people asked for. And then, one night out of nowhere, I saw her on TV. Melissa. Being interviewed for some nonprofit gala in D.C., talking about resilience, about community leadership. She looked stunning, confident. I didn't recognize her voice at first. It was polished, practiced. When the reporter asked about her family, she smiled and said, "It was just my mom and me growing up. She was everything. That was it. No mention of me. No hint that I ever existed." That smile told me everything. I had been erased, not forgotten. And that kind of absence, the intentional kind, that's what finally made something move inside me again. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want a seat at her table. I just wanted to stand where she could see me and know that I was still here, still standing. That's what took me to the wedding. Not some sentimental dream, just the simple, quiet need to be real in her eyes, even if it was only for a moment, or even if it hurt. The months after the fire were a blur of formalities and failure. Insurance agents, funeral arrangements, investigations. There was never any blame assigned, at least not officially. Everyone said I did everything I could, but Melissa didn't believe that. I could see it in her eyes at the hospital when she sat beside me, my leg in traction, her mother already in the ground. She didn't cry. She just stared. "You were there," she said, and she still died. I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I asked myself the same thing every night. What could I have done differently? Should I have gone left instead of right? Called for backup sooner? Carried her differently? The questions never stopped. But none of that mattered to Melissa. For her, I had failed in the one moment that counted. And when kids believe their parents are invincible, that kind of failure feels like betrayal. She moved in with her aunt not long after barely 18, packed everything into a borrowed SUV, and didn't say goodbye. I tried writing letters. At first, they came back unopened. Then she moved and stopped forwarding her mail. I left voicemails, birthdays, Christmas, the day she graduated from college, but they were never returned. The last message I left was simple. "I still love you, Melissa. That's all. I always will." I never called again. People told me to move on. Some even blamed me. "You were too stoic," they said. "You should have broken down more. Let her see you cry." But I wasn't built like that. I was raised in a world where men carried weight in silence, where love was action, not confession. And somewhere along the way, that silence became my prison. Years passed. I'd hear things about her through other people, cousins, an old neighbor once, even from a rookie firefighter who recognized my name and said, "Aren't you Melissa Harrow's father?" That's when I learned she'd changed her last name. Harrow, her mother's name. That one cut deeper than I expected, not because she wanted to honor her mom, but because it felt like she needed to cut me out of her identity to build her own. Like I was dead weight she had to shed to climb higher. I never challenged it. I didn't want to be the bitter old man chasing after a daughter who'd already let go. I tried to find peace in what I still had. I built furniture, walked every morning, taught a kid in the neighborhood how to fix engines. But every time I passed a church with bells ringing or saw a wedding photo in a magazine, I felt that dull, low ache in my ribs. Not pain, just absence. The kind that never leaves. Then came the invitation. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Her new name, Melissa Harrow, typed in elegant font. Mine handwritten, lowercase. Frank Halden. No honorific, no father of the bride, just a seat filler if even that. No letter, no hope you can come, just a line at the bottom. Ceremony begins at 4 p.m. sharp. Formal attire. It was efficient, cold, like I was being summoned, not invited. I sat at my kitchen table for nearly an hour just staring at the card. My hands didn't shake, my chest didn't tighten. It was a different kind of hurt, deep, quiet final. But the longer I looked, the more something rose in me. Not anger, not pride, just resolve. If that was how she wanted to write the final chapter of our story, fine. But I would show up for it. I wouldn't be edited out. I wouldn't let her wedding become the full erasure of everything we once were. I called no one, told no one. I pulled out the old Navy suit I wore to my wife's funeral. It still fit more or less. I polished my shoes, pressed the shirt, and clipped my fire captain's pin inside the lapel, not for show but for strength. I booked a quiet motel room 30 miles from the venue and drove down 2 days early. I didn't stay in the city, didn't go sightseeing. I walked, sat, thought, practiced how to stand tall without speaking, practiced how to endure invisibility. Because I knew what was coming. I didn't expect kindness. I didn't expect recognition. I just wanted to be in the room when she looked back over her shoulder someday and remembered. I was there. I never stopped being there, even when she didn't see me, even when she didn't want me. The morning of the rehearsal dinner, I sat in my motel room staring at the suit hanging by the window. Sunlight cut across the fabric, casting long, thin shadows that looked almost like scars. I didn't touch it. Not yet. I didn't want to wrinkle it before it was time. Instead, I looked again at the invitation I'd folded and unfolded a dozen times. It hadn't changed. Frank Halden, lowercase letters tucked in the corner like a formality. There was no mention of my role, no instructions about where to sit or when to arrive. Just the date and time like a courtroom summons. I arrived 15 minutes early as always. Years in the service will do that to a man. The venue was a converted art gallery, exposed brick string light servers and black aprons gliding past with silver trays. My name wasn't on any of the place cards. A girl at the check-in table squinted at her list and finally said, "You can just sit at the back, sir. It's mostly family up front." I nodded. No argument. I'd been relegated to the edges of rooms for so long, it almost felt natural. My table was next to the kitchen door. Every few minutes the servers would pass, pushing carts of food or dishes. I didn't mind. I liked watching people move. I didn't recognize most of the guests. Melissa's world had grown without me. New friends, new mentors, men in sharp suits, women in designer gowns. I sat still, hands on my lap, listening to the laughter echo off the brick walls. Then she walked in. My daughter, Melissa. She was radiant, confident, glowing, dressed in emerald silk that caught every light. People rose to greet her. Glasses clinked. Someone offered a toast. She laughed that familiar little laugh that used to ring through our hallway when she was 5 and playing dress-up in her mother's shoes. She didn't look at me. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. I could have been a server, a guest's plus one, a ghost. Then someone tapped a glass and called for quiet. Melissa took the microphone with practiced ease. She thanked everyone for coming, for supporting her, and the journey she and Thomas had built together. She smiled like a politician, confident, warm. And then she said, "I'm so grateful for all the love in this room. Even my father is here tonight." There was a pause. I looked up. She turned slightly, just enough to glance in my direction without making eye contact. "It's been a long time," she continued. "We don't talk much, but he came. And that's something." Some polite laughter trickled through the room. Then lighter, she added, "He's retired now, used to be a firefighter, though I think these days he mostly watches the flames from afar." More laughter, softer, controlled. I didn't react, didn't move. Just looked at the glass of water in front of me, condensation pooling like sweat on marble. Then her fiancé Thomas stepped in. He took the mic and said something generic, gratitude, future building together. I barely heard it. My ears rang like they used to in the heat of a blaze when your helmet vibrates from a backdraft and everything goes silent for a moment before the roar returns. Dinner followed. People mingled. Someone passed me a plate without a word. I ate slowly, deliberately. Every movement precise, contained. I wasn't there for food. I was there for presence. For visibility. And no matter how invisible they tried to make me, I stayed seated. I stayed grounded. I stayed real. The wedding was held at a cathedral tucked into the hills above the city. The kind with stone arches and stained glass windows that filtered morning light into colors too soft to trust. I arrived early, parking my truck 2 blocks away to avoid the valet line. My suit was pressed, my shoes polished, the fire captain's pin still tucked into the lapel where no one could see it, but I could feel it like armor. The usher didn't ask my name. He glanced at the card I held, shrugged, and pointed me toward the back pew. "Families up front," he said. I didn't argue. I never do. The pew was hard, the kind that makes you sit up straight or slump in defeat. I chose neither. I sat like I had on too many overnights at the station, alert, quiet, waiting. Guests trickled in, filling the sanctuary with the sound of polite chatter and perfume. Melissa's mother's side took the front rows, her aunts, her new stepfather, the man she once told people had helped raise her after the fire. That line always stuck with me, as if I'd been absent when I'd been there every night until she turned away. No one looked at me. I was a shadow in a sea of satin and suits. Then the music began, and everyone stood. The doors opened. Melissa stepped in, glowing like the woman I used to imagine she'd become. Graceful, controlled, every movement rehearsed. Her eyes scanned the room once, passed right over me without pause. Thomas waited at the altar, hands clasped, eyes shining. The priest welcomed us, spoke of love and faith and journeys built together. I barely heard him. I was watching her, watching how easily she moved through the room that had no space for me. Then came the readings, the vows, and then the family blessing. The priest asked for immediate family to join the couple. Melissa's mother stepped forward, her stepfather followed, her aunts, but not me. I felt the silence where my name should have been. The priest looked confused for a second, glancing at his notes, then continued without comment. My hand stayed still in my lap. I didn't rise. I didn't flinch. Melissa never looked back. The blessing passed. The couple kissed. Applause filled the room like smoke. I sat through it all, unmoving. At the reception hall, my place card read only Mr. Halden. It sat at a table near the kitchen next to a drafty vent and a stack of unused chairs. The linens didn't match. My napkin was paper, not cloth. I smiled at the detail. It was too deliberate to be accidental. A statement in textile. I poured my own water, waited for the speeches. Melissa stood beneath a chandelier, glass in hand, the mic like a scepter. She was composed, charismatic, and as always deliberate. I've always believed that we're not defined by our past, she said, but by who shows up when it matters. Applause. She smiled, soaking it in. My mom showed up. My friends showed up. And even my father, well, he showed up too. A ripple of awkward laughter. She turned her gaze finally directly to me. He's retired now, used to run into burning buildings, or so the stories go. These days I hear he mostly stays away from anything too hot to handle. Another wave of laughter. Thomas stood behind her, frozen. She went on lighter. But hey, everyone's got their limits. Let's raise a glass to the people who show up no matter how late. She raised hers. The crowd followed, some hesitantly. Then her mother added from her seat, to the man who taught us all how not to handle fire. That one drew louder laughs. My glass remained on the table untouched. The room was bright, polished, artificial. I looked around. Not one person had turned to me in defense. Not one friend, cousin, or old colleague had stood. It was exactly as I had expected. And yet something shifted. A hush, slow and unsure. Thomas stepped forward, took the microphone from Melissa gently but firmly. He cleared his throat. Actually, he said, there's something I need to say. The room quieted. You all know I'm not from this city. I grew up in the suburbs of Milwaukee, and when I was 9 years old, my elementary school caught fire. A few heads turned. Most people don't remember it, he said, but I do. I remember being trapped in the gym with 30 other kids. Smoke so thick you couldn't see. I remember screaming. His voice faltered, and then a man kicked the door open, carried out 2 kids at a time, kept going back in. That man had a busted leg. He couldn't walk straight, but he came in for me. He tied his belt around my arm when I couldn't breathe. He carried me out last. Silence. Not a single glass moved. That man, he said, turning to face me, was Captain Frank Halden. This man right here. Gasps, audible, sharp. He walked toward me, stood in front of my chair, and bowed. Not a nod, not a gesture, but a full, precise bow. Sir, he said, you saved my life. And then he added into the mic, you are the reason I'm here. The reason this wedding can even happen. Melissa's hand dropped. The glass slipped. Someone caught it before it shattered. Her face drained of color, her mouth opened but no sound came. I stood slowly, not to take the mic, not to speak, just to stand. Thomas stood beside me. Then one by one others rose. A former firefighter, an old friend from the department, a paramedic I hadn't seen in a decade. They stood in silence. No applause, just presence. Melissa looked around, eyes wild. Her mother reached for her arm. She pulled away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The air was different now, charged, clear, like the moment after a fire is put out when the smoke lifts and everything is still. That was enough. That was everything. I didn't speak a word. I didn't have to. The room had already said everything, in the way their gazes shifted, in the way chairs scraped against the floor as people stood not in applause, but in silent correction. Melissa stood still, glass now cradled in both hands like it might anchor her to the moment. She didn't look at me anymore. Her eyes scanned the crowd as if searching for someone to interrupt, to reverse what had just happened. But there was no undoing it. Thomas remained beside me, steady, respectful, his voice still echoing in the corners of that opulent hall. "Sir, you are the reason I'm alive." It was the kind of sentence that rewrites everything. I saw her mother rise, face-pale steps, hesitant as she approached. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her voice, once so firm, was barely more than breath. "Frank," she said, "we didn't know." I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but because some truths are not owed an explanation. I turned slowly and walked toward the far end of the room. I didn't storm out. I didn't flinch. I moved like the fire had moved through me, controlled, unwavering, certain. Behind me I heard nothing but silence, not even the clink of cutlery, not even a whisper. Just that electric quiet when the truth finally sits in a room and demands to be seen. In the hallway I passed a server who gave me a nod. Not a pitying one, not confused, just respectful. I nodded back. That was enough. When I reached the lobby, the concierge at the desk straightened up and said, "Captain Halden, sir." I had never seen the young man before. I gave him a small smile, the kind I hadn't felt in years, and stepped out into the fading sunlight. The evening had cooled. A breeze brushed past my face like a reminder, sharp, real clean. I loosened my tie, looked up at the sky, and exhaled slowly. My daughter hadn't followed. She hadn't called after me. She hadn't needed to. Everything that needed to be said had already filled that room. I had not raised my voice. I had not made a scene. I had simply shown up, and somehow that had been louder than any accusation. I didn't return to the reception. I didn't wait for dessert, or for someone to offer me a second chance wrapped in polite apologies. I walked to my truck, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there with the engine off. The silence inside was heavier than the hall had been. But it was the kind of silence I understood, earned, not imposed. I didn't cry. There was nothing left to mourn. What died in that room wasn't our relationship. It had already withered long ago. What died was the narrative she built, without me, the one where I was a ghost, a shadow, a failed man. That story could no longer survive in the light of what Thomas said. She would remember that day, not for the color of her flowers or the taste of her wedding cake, but for the moment her version of the truth collapsed, and I didn't need to watch it fall. I drove back to the motel, took off my jacket, hung it carefully. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the wall, like it held something sacred. I wasn't tired. I wasn't angry. I just felt still. The kind of stillness that comes after a fire when the smoke clears and the sky looks bluer than it should. I left town the next morning. No note, no goodbye, no forwarding address. I didn't wait for her to call. I knew she wouldn't. And that was fine. That was the point. I hadn't gone to mend things. I'd gone to reclaim something not from her but from myself. my dignity, my truth, my right to exist outside her version of me. She could tell whatever story she wanted, but now she would have to say my name with care, with hesitation, with the memory of 100 people turning to stare not at her, but at me. That was justice. Quiet, uncompromising, unforgettable. I settled into a small town off the coast of Michigan, far enough from the city to hear birds more often than sirens. The house I found was modest white shingles, one floor a porch that creaked in the wind like it had stories to tell. It didn't need much work, but I worked on it anyway. Fixed the shutters, replaced the light fixtures, restained the porch swing. Manual things, steady things. The kind of labor that reminds you that your hands still know how to build something instead of just holding memories. I didn't unpack the old fire gear. I didn't hang the metals. They stayed in a cedar box at the back of the closet, not hidden, but not displayed. They weren't for visitors. They were reminders not of glory, but of survival. A local library asked if I'd speak once when they learned about my past. I declined. Quiet was what I came for. Not accolades, not closure, just space. A boy from the neighborhood started visiting every Saturday. 12 years old, all energy and questions. He helped me plant tomatoes in the backyard. Asked if I'd ever really saved anyone. I told him the truth. A few I said. He asked if I was a hero. I shook my head. I just didn't run. He didn't understand at first. One day he came by with a newspaper, waving it like a flag. Someone had posted about the wedding. A photo of me and Thomas, not staged, not posed, just that moment when he bowed. The headline read, "The Man Behind the Rescue." I read it once and tucked it away. I didn't call Melissa. I didn't send a message. If she wanted to reach out, she would. But weeks passed, then months. No letter, no call. I'd expected that. She wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. That too was fine. Because this wasn't about her. It never had been. I'd spent years waiting to be understood, to be welcomed back into a story I never stopped belonging to. But now I didn't need that. I had written my own. One morning the boy asked again, "Do you miss being a fireman?" I thought about it. The adrenaline, the weight of gear, the moment when everything depended on one decision. I smiled. Sometimes I said, "But I don't miss the noise." He looked confused. I pointed to the lake beyond the trees. "There's a kind of peace you earn," I said, "after you've walked through enough fire." He nodded, even if he didn't understand. He would one day. After he left, I sat on the porch and watched the sun tilt over the water. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't proving anything.